Chapter 17. Retreat! The large dormitory door had only held for a few minutes before the robots had succeeded in breaching it. They had then occupied the first floor, while the students were holed up on the second story with the Ishiyamas and Oric's father, Walter. "I'm going downstairs," Yumi whispered after giving her mother a hug to reassure her, "to do some reconnaissance." Nobody tried to hold her back. They were all too scared. The students of Caddick, spread out along the corridor, stared fixedly at her with eyes puffy from sleep, pale as ghosts. "They aren't ready," Yumi thought. "They've never been to Lyoko, and they've never fought Xana. I can't rely on anyone but myself." The girl covered herself down to her eyebrows in the hood of her favorite sweatshirt and turned to the staircase landing. She then took several steps, glued to the staircase railing, and looked down. A robot was coming along the corridor with steady steps. Looking at it in decent lighting, Yumi noticed a detail that had escaped her until now. It had a plaque on the left side of its chest that bore a symbol that looked like a stylized eye, made up of circles and small lines. Yumi knew it all too well. It was the Eye of Xana. The robots were creatures of Lyoko. The automaton arrived at the first step of the staircase, and then turned around and began to walk back down this corridor in the opposite direction, like a soldier making a round. Yumi realized that its armor now seemed thinner, almost transparent. She could see the reflection of the fluorescent lights through the colossus, as if it had transformed into a translucent ghost. The robot suddenly stopped in the middle of the corridor, and its strange head full of yellow lights began to turn, searching for something. After spotting a power outlet near the floor, the giant approached and its hair grew down to its feet. As soon as one of its own plugs reached the floor, it slipped into the socket. A yellowish electric charge jolted through the robot, which immediately began to look more solid. Yumi smiled. So these monsters had a weakness. They needed electricity, and she knew exactly where the school fuse box was. In the basement of the administration building. She had to tell Odd and Richard. An iron hand smashed through the door of Professor Hertz's office. It wavered for an instant, then drew back, grabbing the handle and trying to turn it locked. "Oh no, no, no," Odd murmured. "It's all over." He and Richard were alone in the room. His father and the professor had already sought refuge in the science laboratories, but the boy had insisted on stopping off at the office. He wanted to make sure the code-down dossier was safe. Pressing the folder overflowing with papers against his chest, Odd began to tell himself that, all things considered, this probably hadn't been a very smart idea. "How are we going for bombs?" he asked Richard. "We've only got one smoke one left." "Take it and get ready." Since it wasn't possible to open the door in a more polite manner, the robot decided to use a more hasty method. An armored humanoid launched itself into the frame, causing some bits of plaster to fly from the wall. With the second body slam, the door was projected inside the office, landing with a crash in the chaotic mess of magazines and scientific contraptions. 3 robots moved in through the door. They were so close that Odd could count their bolts. The boy ordered Richard to open fire and sprung at his enemies. The air filled with dense smoke that made Odd cough as he gripped the dossier and lowered his head. But he ended up running into something, making a low dong noise. One of the robots seized him by the neck, grabbed the file from his hands, and threw Odd into the hallway wall. The boy fell to the floor, winded. He saw Richard exit the office on all fours between the legs of a robot that was twice as tall as him. "Let's get out of here, come on," he said while helping the boy up. But, the dossier!" Odd couldn't tear his gaze away from the battered office door. The 3 giants destroyed everything in the room, the red lights on their helmets visible through the dark smoke. At that moment, Richard's phone began to ring. The boy picked up and silently listened for a few seconds. "Change of plans," he said to Odd after hanging up. "Show me how to get to the basement." Yumi reached her parents, breathless from her turbulent run. "Come this way," she said quietly. "They're gathering at the foot of the staircase and will be here soon. What weapons do we have?" Walter Stern gestured to several objects they had arranged on the floor. Baseball bats, tennis rackets, and red and blue tubes full of chemical mixtures prepared by Hertz. They also had another compound bow like Jim Morales's and some 3-kilogram medicine balls resting against the wall. Yumi sighed, took the bow, and tried to pull the string. It was very hard. "Wait," Jim said, approaching her. "If we alter it here and here, we can reduce the strength and make it easier to use." The girl thanked him and turned to her parents. "Gather the other students at the end of the hallway. Jim, Walter, and I will stay here and try to defend everyone." "We can help you," her mother protested. Yumi shook her head. "You need to comfort the students. They're very scared. Walter, please go to Ulrich's room. You should find the weapons he uses for training under his bed. Bamboo swords for kendo, nunchakos, and other things. Jim, come with me to Jeremy's room. If I remember correctly, he should have a good selection of electric cables and other things in his closet that should be useful." Yumi surprised herself. She had taken control naturally, and she was now giving orders to teachers and the other adults, but this was just as well, because she knew Xana and how to fight him. The aluminum bow in her hands, she began to run towards her friend Jeremy's room. Richard observed Odd and raised an eyebrow. "And you're planning on getting through the wall of robots with that?" "With that? And my innate agility," Odd said with a sarcastic smile. The boy finished filling the plastic bucket with detergent and then used the dishcloth to stir the mixture of water and soap. He and Richard had crossed the ground floor of the building without any problems, and then almost made it down into the basement, but there was a small group of robots blocking the passage, causing them to hide in the first room they had come across, the broom cupboard. Odd took the soapy water, turned the door handle, and stuck his head out. At the end of the long hallway was a metallic door that led to the Caddick basement. And that's precisely where the three enormous robots were positioned. They weren't doing anything in particular. They were all simply standing motionless in front of the door. The cables on the head of one of them were so long that they snaked along the floor, and yes, it plugged into one of the nearby power sockets. That must give it quite a recharge. Richard, who was behind him, had taken 2 brooms and was brandishing them like dual lances. Odd smiled at him and nodded. He exited his cupboard refuge. The robot's metallic helmets immediately turned in his direction. The one that was connected to the power socket unplugged its cable from the wall and its hair became disorderly yet again. Odd held his breath before releasing it everything he had, screaming, "Banzai!" at the top of his lungs. He ran along the corridor like a man possessed, a bucket full of soapy water in one hand and dishcloth in the other. Richard hot at his heels. The robots began to walk slowly towards him, their knight-like armor gleaming. Odd ducked, bent his knees, set the bucket down on the black and white flagstone floor, and then turned it upside down, emptying all the water onto the floor. "Now, Richard," he shouted. "Skate!" He let go of the bucket and grabbed the dishcloth with both hands, holding it right in front of him. As soon as he made it to the large puddle of water on the flagstones, he let go of it, sliding feet first towards the door, like a soccer player trying to steal a ball from the opposing team. The robots now also found themselves in the soap-filled water, and Odd heard their iron feet as they slipped and lost their balance. He gritted his teeth and whacked the heel of the one closest to him. The robot collapsed onto the floor with a metallic crash while Odd slid up to the door. He opened it wide, hearing the other robots fall to the floor and seeing Richard quickly approaching. He only had one broomstick now, and it was broken in 2. The young man hurried to the other side of the door and, due to his momentum, slid down the stairs to the basement on his buttocks. I quickly closed the door and followed him. He and Richard quickly crossed the straight basement hallway between dripping pipes and boilers as big as closets. Odd located the fuse boxes. Behind a transparent plastic door that was covered in dust, a series of dark levers could be seen. "Hurry," Richard huffed. "They'll be on us in no time." The boy nodded silently, opened one of the small doors, and began to pull the levers down one by one. The battle took place on a staircase between the first and second floors of the dormitory, and they were losing. Yumi's arrow flew from her bow with a sharp whistle. It hit one of the robots right in the joint between its neck and its armor and remained there. The robot staggered, took another step towards the young girl, tripped on an electric cable stretched from one side of the staircase to the other, and fell face first onto the floor. "Nice shot!" exclaimed Jim, who had given up his bow in favor of the medicine balls. "You've got some natural talent." "Unfortunately, it won't be enough," Yumi responded with a half smile. "There are too many of them." And it was true, although, as the girl had predicted, each shot they landed on the giants made them more and more transparent. The army of enemies was too large. Evidently, they consumed energy in maintaining their solid forms during battle, but each time a robot was about to become invisible, it retreated to the back of the group to plug itself into an electric socket, and another would immediately take its place. The robots had slowly begun to gain ground. They climbed the stairs while avoiding the cables stretched across some steps, just like the rest of the traps they had prepared. Each time they drew closer to the desk, Jim and Walter had positioned at the top of the stairs as a last line of defense. Yumi loosed another arrow, then reached into her quiver. Her fingers grabbed at nothing until they finally found a thin aluminum rod. The girl stopped to glance over her shoulder. It was the last one. She'd run out of arrows. "How are our munitions holding up?" she asked. "We're almost out, I'm afraid," Walter panted in her ear. Yumi shot her final arrow. She then dropped the bow and turned, searching for a new weapon. She found a pair of Ulrich's nunchakos abandoned on the floor. They were 2 shiny metal sticks joined at one end by a small chain. They could be of use. She gripped one of the sticks and spun the other around with a rapid wrist movement to give it speed. She then jumped over the protective desk and began her attack at the bottom of the stairs. The girl struck one of the robots with her weapon above its stomach, managing to cause it to reel back, then ducked down, striking another robot on the backs of its knees. An enormous hand seized her by her sweatshirt and threw her back. Yumi lost all the air from her lungs while the pain shot through her back. She tried to get up. She heard Jim shout before a detonation filled the air, hurting her ears. It was a gunshot. Walter had taken out his gun. Yumi increased her grip on her nunchako to whack the hand of the robot before it could grab her again, then heard another detonation and flattened herself against the wall so Walter could more easily miss her. However, a fish struck her side and the nunchako slipped from between her fingers, falling to the floor with a dull noise. She was disarmed. The girl prepared to fight with her bare hands, and that's when the lights went out. The basement was plunged into complete darkness. Odd and Richard applied themselves to the task, first disconnecting the main current and then blocking the switches to the emergency generator, and everything else they had unearthed there. They couldn't see any further from the tips of their noses, but no robot had come down to capture them, which was undoubtedly a good sign. "Do you have a lighter?" Odd asked. No, but I have my phone. After a few moments of silence, Richard sighed. It's no use. I can't find it. It must have fallen out of my pocket during the fight against those monsters. Don't worry, I've still got mine, said Odd. They heard a click, and he could then finally see Richard's pale face, illuminated by the white splendor of his phone's screen. You okay? The boy asked him. It's nothing, but thanks. Looks like we've won. Yeah. Guided by the weak light of his telephone, they retraced their steps and made it back to the corridor that had not long since been infested by robots. Silence reigned, and the place seemed completely deserted. They left, Richard commented, incredulous. Odd looked for Professor Hertz's number in his contact list. He quickly spoke with her. A hard battle had taken place in the science laboratories. Principal Delmas had suffered a head injury and needed an ice pack, but nobody had been seriously hurt. The robots were retreating. Yumi had been right. Without electricity, the cowards were forced to flee. Too exhausted to jump for joy, Odd and Richard left the building. It was a humid and cold night, and the air was thick with fog. It was the first time he had seen the school in such a way, with no lights, not even in the main buildings. They walked slowly along the path between the trees that led to the dormitory and came in through the main door, which the robots had broken down, leaving it lying warped on the floor like a pile of iron and bits of shiny crystal. I hope everyone's okay, thought Odd. He and Richard climbed the stairs and reached the first floor. There were signs of battle everywhere, power sockets torn from the walls, traces of chemical substances all over the place, and broken down doors, creating a desolated image. In one corner was a trampled pink shirt, abandoned alongside a pair of mismatched socks. But there were no more robots there, and that was the most important thing in the end. The two boys then began to hear voices, murmurs, crying, off whispers. Hey! Odd called. He sped up his pace. He and Richard hurried up the stairs leading to the second floor. They had to dodge around a barricade of tables, two of which had been broken in half. They then saw lights, lighters, matches, mobile phone screens. Hey! He shouted again. Is everyone okay? A shadow dashed towards him. It was Yumi, looking unkempt and with a serious scratch on her face, slowly covering her cheek in blood. You did it, Odd, the girl said. She leapt onto him and took him in her arms.